My name is Natalie Williams, and I'm 28 years old. As I drove toward my childhood home, my palms were sweating against the steering wheel. It had been 5 years since I last set foot in that house, and today, I was returning with a military colonel insignia hidden in my bag. My family had always dismissed my military career as insignificant, but little did they know that tomorrow, at my father's company event, everything would change. I parked in the driveway, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. As I walked toward the front door, I couldn't help but feel the weight of all those years. My family's opinions had shaped much of my life, but now, I was ready to show them who I truly was. Before I continue with this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever been underestimated by family, this story will show you exactly how sweet vindication can taste. When I walked through the front door of my childhood home, nothing had changed. The same faded family photos lined the hallway. The same worn furniture occupied the living room, and the same judgment hung in the air. My small-town Montana upbringing was preserved like a time capsule right down to the outdated curtains my mother, Diana, had always refused to replace. "Natalie, you need it." My mother called from the kitchen, not bothering to come greet me. Her voice carried the same subtle disappointment it always had, especially when addressing me instead of my brother Gregory. I set my bag down and wandered through the house, trailing my fingers along familiar surfaces. My father, Albert, had worked at Pinnacle Defense Systems for over 30 years, climbing from engineer to senior executive through dedication and networking. Our family had always revolved around his career success and the shadow it cast for Gregory to follow. "Your brother will be here soon," my mother informed me as I entered the kitchen. "He just got promoted again, senior project manager now." The pride in her voice was unmistakable, the kind she never used when discussing my career. "That's great," I replied, the words feeling mechanical after years of practice. "I'll have to congratulate him." She continued preparing dinner, chattering about Gregory and his wife Megan, their new house, and all the corporate accomplishments that made them the golden children of our family. Not once did she ask about my life or my career. Excusing myself, I headed upstairs to my old bedroom. Like everything else, it remained frozen in time. Cheerleading trophies from high school, academic awards, and college acceptance letters still decorated the walls and shelves. My parents had preserved everything from before I made my disappointing choice to join ROTC. Instead of pursuing a business degree, what they didn't display were any acknowledgments of my military career. No photos of my commissioning ceremony, no shadow boxes of achieved ranks, no newspaper clippings about deployments or promotions. In their minds, I had wasted my potential the moment I chose service over corporate success. I sat on my childhood bed, running my hand over the familiar quilt, remembering the night I told them about my ROTC scholarship. My father had stared at me with such disappointment that I almost changed my mind. "The military is for people without options, Natalie," he had said. "You're smarter than that." Even then, they had been grooming Gregory to follow in my father's footsteps at Pinnacle. Gregory had eagerly embraced the plan, thriving on the favoritism and using every opportunity to remind me how much more successful he would be. I opened my suitcase and carefully removed the garment bag containing my dress uniform. Tomorrow, Pinnacle Defense Systems would be hosting their annual leadership conference, and my father had mentioned that the CEO, Shannon Murphy, would be visiting their branch. What my family didn't know was that I was now the military liaison for the $1.20 billion defense contract between the Army and Pinnacle, position I had earned through years of dedicated service and expertise. My finger traced over the silver eagle insignia of my colonel rank, achieved faster than almost anyone in my division's history. At 28, I was one of the youngest colonels in modern Army history, specializing in cybersecurity defense systems, the very technology Pinnacle was contracted to develop. I carefully hung up my uniform in the closet, making sure it was hidden behind some old clothes. For tonight, I would endure one more family dinner of dismissal and condescension. Tomorrow would be different. Dinner that evening was just as I expected. Gregory bragging about his latest promotion, Megan discussing their new house, and my parents nodding along, completely absorbed in their picture-perfect version of success. It was the same cycle I'd endured for years. Every time they talk about Gregory's achievements, I would shrink a little more inside. Gregory, of course, never noticed. He was too busy basking in the glow of their approval. The new project manager role is a huge responsibility, he said, leaning back in his chair. Megan and I are already planning the next few years. If I keep this pace, I'll be in the VP position in no time. My mother smiled. Well, that's fantastic, Gregory. We're all so proud of you. Your father and I always knew you'd follow in Albert's footsteps. So much potential, just like him. My father nodded, his gaze never leaving Gregory's face. Exactly. You've got the work ethic, the drive. You'll do well here, son. I could feel my pulse quicken. The familiar knot of frustration twisted in my stomach, but I kept it under control. Tonight wasn't about letting them see how much their words still stung. Tonight was about holding my ground, showing them who I had become, even if they didn't want to acknowledge it. I added nothing to the conversation, focusing on pushing the food around on my plate. The roasted chicken was tender, but I couldn't taste it. The sharp contrast between their praise of Gregory and the silence they reserved for me made everything feel distant, like I was watching this scene unfold from somewhere far away. Eventually, the topic of my career came up unavoidably, as it always did. My father glanced at me, his expression neutral, but I could see the familiar judgment behind his eyes. So, Natalie, he said, his voice casual, but I could tell he was trying to sound interested. How's the military? Still playing soldier? I bit my lip, resisting the urge to snap. Gregory snickered, a smug smile spreading across his face. You know, Dad, I don't get it. I mean, how could you let her choose that over, a real job? It was exactly what I expected, Gregory using the chance to subtly belittle me while staying just enough in his parents' good graces. He looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I glanced up at my father. I'm not playing soldier, I said, my voice even. I've earned my rank, my place, and my responsibilities. Unlike some people, I'm leading a team and making real decisions that impact national security. My mother shot me a pointed look. I'm sure you're doing fine, dear, but we just don't understand why you chose that path. You could have had a business career. You could have been at Pinnacle just like Gregory. The words stung, but I didn't let them show. Instead, I met her gaze, my voice steady. I made my choice because it's what I'm passionate about, and I'm proud of it. It's not about following anyone else's path, it's about mine. Gregory chuckled. Sure, if by passionate you mean you just couldn't make it in the real world. My father frowned slightly, but there was still a flicker of that same old disbelief in his eyes. That's enough, Gregory, he said, though there was no real authority behind it. Natalie, if you want to do this military thing, that's your choice, but at least consider how your choices might affect your future. That was it. I had heard this speech so many times, and each time it hit harder. It wasn't just about the military anymore. It was about them believing I wasn't capable of succeeding without the right kind of career. It was about the fact that they didn't understand my path, never had, never would. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. It was time to turn this around. Actually, Dad, I said, leaning forward slightly, I think you might be surprised by how much I've actually accomplished. The Army's been pretty good to me. I've just earned a huge promotion, one that you wouldn't expect from someone like me. Their faces turned blank, as if the conversation had suddenly shifted into a zone they didn't understand. My father blinked, not knowing how to respond. Gregory opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off before he could. I'm the military liaison for the $1.2 billion defense contract between Pinnacle and the Army, I said quietly but firmly. I'm also leading a cybersecurity division that's been recognized as a national model. And I paused, letting the words land. I've been promoted to colonel. The room went silent. Gregory blinked a few times, processing the words, and my father's gaze sharpened. My mother's face, usually set in her stern, judgmental lines, softened just slightly as she looked at me. They were stunned, shocked even, but the moment passed quickly, and as I tried to gather their thoughts, my father finally spoke up, his tone more guarded now. I wasn't aware you had achieved that level. That's single quotes Z dot dot impressive, but Natalie, this is still the military. You'll never have the kind of career stability or opportunities that someone in the corporate world has. Perhaps, I said, my voice calm, but the satisfaction of finally saying it out loud was undeniable. But I'm not interested in stability if it means sacrificing my happiness. This is what I've worked for, and I'm proud of it. The silence at the table lingered for a few moments, thick with the weight of the truth I had just laid out. My father's face had softened slightly, but he was still processing the information. Gregory, on the other hand, looked downright confused, as though he couldn't understand how I could be proud of a career that, in his eyes, was still beneath what he imagined success to be. You don't get it, Gregory finally said, shaking his head. You're still living in this world of honor and service, but that's not going to get you the kind of life you want. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep calm. This was nothing new. Gregory had always believed that a career could only be valuable if it came with a fat paycheck and a clear path to the top of the corporate ladder. In his world, my choices would always be seen as second-rate. Gregory, I said, keeping my voice level. Just because your definition of success is based on money and status doesn't mean that mine should be. My work is about something bigger than that. It's about security, integrity, and making a real difference in the world. If you can't see that, then maybe you're the one who's missing out. Gregory's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, my mother intervened, her voice softer than usual, but still tinged with that subtle disapproval that always seemed to follow me. I don't know why you insist on making everything so difficult, Natalie, she said. You could have had it all work in a real company, meet important people, live in the right neighborhood, but instead, you chose this unconventional path. I bit back the frustration that threatened to rise again. Mom, I chose this. I earned this, I said, leaning forward. I didn't just fall into it. You've never understood what I do, but that's okay. This isn't about you. It's about what I've built, and I'm proud of it. She sighed and returned to her plate, unwilling to meet my eyes. As usual, she couldn't understand. She never had. The conversation turned back to Gregory and his latest promotion, as if nothing had changed. As if my achievement had been brushed aside, just like every other moment in my life that hadn't fit their idea of success. But I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to prove anything to them. The reality was, I didn't need their approval. To be proud of myself, as dinner wound down, I excused myself from the table. I need to get some rest. Big day tomorrow. Gregory shot me a skeptical glance. Oh, of course. Big day with the military, he said, his tone dismissive. I didn't dignify him with a response. Instead, I smiled thinly, knowing that tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning, I woke up early, a sense of anticipation building inside me. I dressed carefully in my military uniform, adjusting every detail, my colonel insignia, my polished boots, my perfectly ironed jacket. I looked at myself in the mirror, taking a moment to appreciate the person I had become. For so long, I had tried to fit into a mold that wasn't mine, but now I was comfortable in my own skin. In the life I had built, I didn't need my family's approval. I didn't need to impress them. But today, I was going to show them that I had already achieved something they had never understood. I grabbed my bag, slipped my phone into my pocket, and headed out the door. I could feel the weight of the day ahead, but it wasn't an anxious feeling. It was a feeling of empowerment. The drive to the event was a blur, but when I arrived at Pinnacle Defense Systems headquarters, I felt my heart race with a new kind of excitement. I'd been invited as the military liaison, a role that would forever change the perception of who I was. It was no longer about my family's judgment or Gregory's sarcastic remarks. Today, it was about business. About the contract I had worked tirelessly on for years. The building loomed in front of me, gleaming in the early morning light. It was everything my father had always strived for, a monument to corporate success. But now, I was stepping inside not as his daughter, but as a key player in a deal that would shape the future of both the military and Pinnacle. As I entered the conference room, I saw the familiar faces of the company's executives. My father, of course, was at the center, sitting at the head of the table. His eyes flickered to me as I walked in, his expression unreadable. But I could see the recognition in his eyes. He knew exactly what I was about to do. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice steady and confident. "I'm Colonel Natalie Williams, and I'll be leading today's presentation on the defense contract partnership between the Army and Pinnacle." My father's gaze narrowed slightly, but he didn't speak. Instead, he watched as I took my place at the front of the room. The room was filled with high-ranking executives, all listening intently as I explained the details of the contract. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, but it didn't faze me. I was in control now. As I went through the key points of the contract, I could see my father's colleagues slowly starting to take me seriously. The skepticism in their eyes began to fade, replaced by curiosity and, dare I say, respect. I spoke with authority, with knowledge, and with the kind of confidence that comes from years of hard work. When I finished the presentation, there was a moment of silence before one of the executives, a woman named Sharon, spoke up. "Colonel Williams, I must say, I'm impressed. You've certainly done your homework. This is a crucial partnership, and we appreciate the thoroughness of your approach." I could feel my father stiffen slightly, but I smiled and nodded. "Thank you, Sharon. This partnership is important not just for Pinnacle, but for national security. I'm here to ensure that both sides succeed." The meeting continued, but I could see the shift in the room. The executives were starting to see me not just as a military officer, but as a skilled professional in my own right. And when the meeting ended, Sharon turned to me with a smile. "You'll be hearing from us soon, Colonel. We're looking forward to moving forward with this partnership." I nodded, standing tall as I collected my materials. "I look forward to it," I said, shaking her hand firmly. As I walked out of the conference room, I passed my father, who was now standing at the back of the room. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, there was no judgment in them, just a quiet acknowledgement of who I'd become. As I walked down the hall of Pinnacle Defense Systems, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. The presentation had gone perfectly. The executives were clearly impressed, and I knew that this contract would be one of the most successful projects in both my career and Pinnacle's history. But there was something else in the air today, a shift I hadn't expected. I'd spent years trying to earn my father's approval, trying to prove that I was worthy of recognition. But today I realized that I had already done it. It wasn't about his approval anymore. It was about the work I had put in, the achievements I had earned, and the respect I had gained on my own terms. As I made my way to the lobby, I saw Gregory standing near the elevators, his usual smug smile on his face. I paused for a moment, debating whether or not to approach him. The old part of me wanted to brush past him, avoid the confrontation, but the new me, stronger, more confident, decided to face him head on. "Gregory," I said, my voice steady. He turned toward me, his eyebrows raised in surprise. "Natalie, didn't expect to see you here." "I'm sure you didn't," I said, meeting his gaze. "I've been busy with the military contract you've been so eager to dismiss." Gregory's face faltered for just a second before he recovered with his usual arrogance. "I'm sure you did fine. But let's be real, Nat, this isn't exactly the kind of career you imagined, is it? I mean, it's good for now, but don't you ever wonder what it's like to have real power?" I could feel the old anger rising, but I pushed it down. "Real power?" I repeated, cocking my head. "You mean the kind of power that depends on connections and corporate games? I have something better. I have a purpose. I'm not working for a paycheck or a promotion. I'm working for something bigger than any of that." Gregory laughed dismissively. But I could see that there was a crack in his confidence. Sure. Whatever makes you feel good about your choices. You wouldn't understand, I said, my voice firm. You've never had to make a choice for yourself. Everything you've ever done has been handed to you. Gregory's expression flickered, but it was gone in an instant. Whatever, Natalie. You do you. I didn't wait for him to finish. I turned and walked away, my steps deliberate and strong. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself to him. He could think what he wanted. The truth was, I was no longer seeking his approval. The elevator doors slid open as I stepped inside, and I glanced at my reflection in the mirrored walls. The woman staring back at me was no longer the one who had tried to fit into someone else's. Oh well, Dee. She was someone who had created her own path, someone who had earned her place, not just in the military, but in this world. On her own terms, as I left Pinnacle that day, I felt a sense of finality, like I closed the door on a chapter of my life that had once consumed me. My family, my father, Gregory, they had always been a part of my story, but they no longer define me. I had built my own story, and that was what mattered now. The evening sun cast a golden glow on the city streets as I walked toward my car. The future felt wide open in front of me. I was on the verge of something bigger. I knew there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long while, I was looking forward to facing them. The weeks that followed felt like a blur of success and personal growth. My military career continued to rise, and the Pinnacle Defense Systems contract was moving forward smoothly, thanks to the hard work I had put in. But more than that, I started to see the difference in the way I viewed my family. No longer did I crave their approval or their validation. I had reached a point where I was proud of who I was, what I had done, and where I was going. But just when I thought I had everything figured out, life had a funny way of throwing me a curveball. It came in the form of a phone call. It was from my mother. I had been avoiding her calls for weeks. After the family dinner and the conversation with my father, I wasn't sure how to handle things. I didn't want to dive back into the same patterns of guilt and criticism, but deep down, I knew I couldn't keep running from the possibility of a real conversation with her. I hesitated before picking up the phone. Hello? Natalie? My mother's voice was soft, almost tentative. We need to talk. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for whatever was coming. Okay, what's going on? There was a long pause on the other end of the line before she finally spoke. I have been thinking a lot about what you said. About the military, about your career. About everything. I waited for her to continue. Not sure where this conversation was headed. I've been wrong, she said quietly, and I could hear the faint tremor in her voice. I've spent so many years telling you what you should do, what would make you successful. I was so focused on what I thought was best that I couldn't see what you were really capable of. I let her words sink in. This wasn't the conversation I had expected. My mother had always been the one to judge, to criticize. But now there was something different in her voice. Something that sounded like real regret. I've always wanted you to be proud of me, I said, my voice softer than I intended. But I can't keep chasing your version of success, Mom. I've built my own life, and it's enough. I know, she replied quickly, as though she hadn't meant to sound so defensive. But you've been so strong, so independent, and I've never really acknowledged that. I'm sorry. It was a hard pill to swallow, but I could hear the sincerity in her voice. For the first time, I felt like she was really seeing me not just as her daughter, but as someone who had made her own way in the world. And maybe, just maybe, she was finally proud of me for it. I never wanted to hurt you, she continued. I wanted to protect you, to make sure you had everything you needed. But I see now that I've been holding you back. I couldn't help but smile, a genuine smile this time. It's okay, Mom. You were doing what you thought was best. I just had to find my own path. There was a pause, and then she said, I know I can't change the past, but I want to start fresh. Can we try to rebuild? Maybe not all at once. But just something more real? The words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had written off my family's attempts at connection, but now the possibility of something genuine felt within reach. I'd like that, I said, my voice firm but kind. I think we can try. The conversation ended on a hopeful note, and as I set the phone down, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I had spent so much time running away from my family's expectations, and now, for the first time, I felt like they were finally seeing me for who I really was. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but the first step had been taken. I didn't need their approval, but I had never really stopped wanting their love. And now it seemed like I might just get both. The weeks following my conversation with my mother were filled with small changes. We began communicating more regularly, and there was an effort on both sides to rebuild the bridges that had long been burned. My mother still had a lot to learn, and I knew it would take time for her to fully grasp the life I had built for myself. But for the first time, there was an open space between us, space where I could exist as myself, not as the person they had always expected me to be. I still kept my distance from Gregory. His dismissive attitude hadn't changed, and I wasn't about to waste my energy trying to prove anything to him. But as for my mother, there was a tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a new way to relate to each other. One evening, a month later, I found myself sitting across from my father at a local restaurant in town, an unexpected invitation from him. The last time we'd spoken like this, just the two of us, was when I was 18 and still living under their roof, full of dreams and questions about my future. I was nervous, but determined to take the step. We didn't waste any time on pleasantries. He ordered a glass of red wine for himself, and I settled into my chair, watching him carefully. "You've made quite a name for yourself," my father said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Pinnacle ... the contract. It's impressive, Natalie." I hadn't expected the compliment to come so easily, but there it was. I nodded, unsure of how to respond. I had spent so many years waiting for his approval that now, hearing it in this quiet way, felt surreal. "Thank you," I said, allowing myself a small smile. "I've worked hard for it." My father studied me for a moment before speaking again. "You always were headstrong, even when you decided to go to the military instead of ... Well, following the family business, I could tell he was trying to steer the conversation back to the past. But this time, it didn't sting the way it used to. "I'm happy I made the choice I did," I said firmly, meeting his gaze. "I've always believed in forging my own path. It's worked out well." For me, a long silence passed between us. It was the kind of silence that used to make me uncomfortable, but now it felt natural. He wasn't trying to convince me I had made the wrong choice anymore. He wasn't trying to mold me into something IWAN single quotes T. After a few minutes, he spoke. Again, his voice quieter. "I didn't know how to support you back then, Natalie. I thought I was doing what was best for you, but I see now that I was wrong." I felt a lump in my throat at his words, but I forced it down. "I know you were trying, Dad. I just had to go my own way." He nodded slowly, a rare moment of vulnerability crossing his features. "I respect that. I've always respected your determination. I just didn't understand it." "I know," I said softly, "and I didn't expect you to." He cleared his throat, a slight embarrassment creeping into his posture. "I might not have understood, but I see it now. I see the strength in what you've done." The words felt like a small weight being lifted from my chest. After all these years, I had finally heard what I needed to hear from him. But even more than that, it felt like we were beginning to truly understand each other. The conversation wasn't perfect, nothing about my relationship with my father ever would be, but it was real. As dinner came to an end, I stood to leave, feeling lighter than I had in years. My father offered me a sincere handshake, his grip firm but warm. "I'm proud of you, Natalie, for everything. And if you ever need anything ... you know where I am." For the first time in my life, I believed him. After that dinner with my father, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, and it certainly didn't erase the years of distance and misunderstanding, but it was something real. It was a step toward the relationship I'd always wanted, not one built on expectations, but on mutual respect and understanding. A few weeks later, I got a call from my mother. This time, there was no hesitation in my voice when I picked up the phone. "Hey, Mom," I greeted her warmly. "Natalie, Her voice wavered, then steadied. "I wanted to apologize. I've been thinking a lot about how I treated you. The way I pushed you into the life I wanted for you. It wasn't fair." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words sink in. For so long, I had been the one waiting for her to change, for her to see me. And now it felt like the moment I had waited for was finally here. "Mom, it's okay," I said softly. "I know you did what you thought was best. We're both just figuring it out now. I know I can't change the past, but I can try to do better," she said, her voice steady now. "I've been reading about military families, about what it means to serve. I want to understand more about what you've done and what you're doing now. You've worked hard for everything, and I want to support that." I couldn't help the smile that tugged at my lips. "I'd like that, Mom. I'd really like that." From that conversation, things shifted. Slowly but surely, I started inviting my parents to events where I could show them more of my world. The first time I brought my father to a military event, he stood beside me, looking out at the team I had built. I could see the pride in his eyes, the same pride that had always been reserved for Gregory's corporate achievements, now redirected. Toward me, it wasn't easy for him. I knew that. He had spent so many years building a vision of success that had nothing to do with what I had chosen. But he was trying, and that meant everything. The next milestone came when Pinnacle invited me to the company's annual gala. I had been a part of their defense contract for over a year by this point, and my role was becoming increasingly recognized. It was time to bring my family into that world. I invited my parents, and to my surprise, they agreed to come. The night of the gala, I saw them walking toward me in the crowd. My father in his black tie, my mother in an elegant dress, looking just a little out of place, but undeniably proud. They walked toward me, and for a brief moment, everything felt right. "Colonel Williams," said a voice from behind me, and I turned to see Shannon Murphy, the CEO of Pinnacle, approaching. "Great to see you. I've been hearing nothing but good things from your team." I shook her hand, trying not to smile too widely. "Thank you, Shannon. It's been a rewarding partnership." As the conversation continued, I noticed my father watching me, his arms crossed, but this time there was no judgment. There was no disappointment, just a quiet respect. And in that moment, I realized that he was finally seeing me for who I had always been, someone capable, someone with a purpose, someone whose choices mattered. After the gala, as we drove home, my mother turned to me, a rare smile on her face. "I'm proud of you, Natalie," she said softly. "And I think I'm starting to understand why you chose this life. It's not about what I imagined, but it's yours. And that's what matters." Her words caught me off guard, but I was ready for them. I'd spent so many years waiting for this moment, and now that it had arrived, I didn't need to rush to fill the silence with my own words. I just let the quiet settle in between us. This was the beginning of something new, a foundation for a relationship that was finally based on respect, not approval, not expectation. As I lay in bed that night, the events of the evening replayed in my mind. I had spent so long building walls between myself and my family, convinced that their view of success would never align with my own. But in the end, it wasn't about them changing. It was about me embracing who I was, not just for them, but for me. Tomorrow, I would continue to lead, to mentor, and to pave the way for the next generation of military leaders. I had found my path, and I was walking it with confidence, knowing that I no longer needed anyone's validation but my own. The days after the gala felt like a turning point. It wasn't just the acknowledgement from my parents or the recognition from Pinnacle's leadership. It was the way I started to see myself in a different light. I had always been driven, always focused on achieving the next milestone, but now I could see the bigger picture. I had already won, not because of any approval from my family or the corporate world, But because I'd built something meaningful with my own two hands, over the following months, I threw myself into my work, but with a new sense of clarity. My role with the Army Pinnacle Partnership continued to grow, and the cyber defense team one had built became a model for other divisions within the military. Every new success felt sweeter not because of the praise it brought, but because it was proof of everything I had fought for: the independence, the self-respect, and the belief in my own abilities. But life has a funny way of challenging you when you least expect it. Just when everything seemed to be falling into place, I got a call from the Army. They needed me to relocate for a high-level assignment in Washington, a position that would require me to leave everything I had built in Montana behind. The decision wasn't easy. I had spent years carving out a space where I could thrive, where I could lead without the shadow of family expectations looming over me. And now I was being asked to leave it all behind for something new, something bigger. I thought about the possibility for days, weighing the pros and cons. Moving to DC meant more visibility, more influence, and the chance to affect national policy on defense security. It was a huge opportunity, but it also meant starting over in a place where I didn't have the comfort of a known environment, where I wouldn't be surrounded by the team I had grown to trust and rely on. I reached out to my father for the first time in weeks, not to ask for advice, but to share my decision. It was time to take another step forward, and this time, I wasn't doing it for anyone but myself. When we spoke, there was no judgment, no expectations, just a quiet understanding. "I think it's time, Natalie," my father said, his voice calm but sincere. "You've always known when to take the next step. If this is what you want, then go for it. I'm proud of you." The words were simple, but they meant everything. For years, I had longed to hear those words from him, and now, finally, I had. I had built this relationship, brick by brick, and it was stronger for it. We both knew that the path ahead would continue to be challenging, but it was a path that we were now both willing to walk, without expectations, just the desire to understand each other. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of packing, organizing, and saying goodbyes. The people who had been part of my life in Montana, my colleagues, my friends, and even some of the skeptics, were all supportive in their own ways. But the hardest part was saying goodbye to my team at the Cyber Defense Division. They had become my family, my second set of eyes, and my driving force. Saying goodbye was bittersweet, but it was time. Time to move on, time to grow. When I arrived in Washington, D.C., the city felt both familiar and foreign. The fast-paced life of the capital was a stark contrast to the quiet, open skies of Montana. But I had a new mission now. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the weight of anyone else's expectations. This was my chance to make an impact, not just for myself, but for the greater good. The first few months were a blur: long days, late nights, and constant adjustments to a new environment. But through it all, I found a new sense of purpose. The work was challenging but rewarding. I was finally in a place where I could shape national policy, influence decisions, and lead with the authority I had earned over the years. As I settled into my new role, I realized that everything had come full circle. The girl who had been overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated was now in a position to make a real difference. And I knew that no matter what came next, I was ready for it. I had learned that success wasn't about living up to someone else's idea of what it should look like. It was about doing the work, staying true to yourself, and knowing that the journey was just as important as the destination. I looked out over the skyline of DC, a sense of peace settling over me. The road had been long, but it had led me exactly where I needed to be. And from here, the possibilities were endless. As the months passed in Washington, D.C., I felt a sense of fulfillment I hadn't known before. The work was challenging, but it was rewarding in a way that aligned with my values: securing the future, protecting our nation, and mentoring the next generation of leaders. I knew I was doing exactly what I was meant to be doing, and I had no regrets about the path I had taken. But life, as always, has its twists. It was at a high-profile meeting on cybersecurity policy when I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years: Shannon Murphy, the CEO of Pinnacle Defense Systems. Her presence at the meeting was expected, but what caught me off guard was her recognition of me in front of the entire room. "Colonel Williams," she said, her tone warm, her smile genuine. "I'm so glad to finally meet you in person. I've heard nothing but great things about your leadership on the defense contract. I believe you're the reason we're moving forward with the next phase." The words were like a breath of fresh air. I had been so focused on my work that I hadn't stopped to consider how far I'd come since that first meeting with Pinnacle. Shannon's acknowledgement of my work felt like the culmination of everything I'd worked for, proof that my decisions, my career choices, had led to something tangible, something meaningful. "Thank you, Shannon," I said, my voice steady, a slight smile tugging at my lips. "It's been a pleasure working with your team. We're making great progress." After the meeting, Shannon pulled me aside. "I've been thinking," she said. "We have an opening for a senior advisory role in our cybersecurity division, and I'd like you to consider joining our board. Your expertise and leadership would be invaluable to us as we move forward." I was taken aback by the offer. At first, I wasn't sure what to say. I had built my career in the military, and now this opportunity to transition into the corporate world was something I hadn't anticipated. But as I thought about it, I realized that this could be another step in the evolution of my journey, another chance to have a bigger impact, to bridge the gap between the military and the private sector, and to continue leading in ways that mattered. "I appreciate the offer, Shannon," I said thoughtfully. "I'll definitely consider it, but I think for now I'm exactly where I need to be." Shannon nodded, understanding. "Of course, but just know the offer stands. You're exactly the kind of leader we need." That conversation, while flattering, didn't immediately change my course. It was a reminder that I had options, choices that I had earned through my hard work, but I wasn't in a rush to make any decisions. I had already proven to myself that I could succeed in this world, and I was content with the direction I was headed. As the year came to a close, I reflected on the journey I had been on. From the girl who had once been dismissed by her family, to the woman who had stood in front of the nation's top defense leaders, I had made a name for myself. More importantly, I had built a life that was entirely my own, not defined by the expectations of others, but by my own drive and vision. On New Year's Eve, as I stood on the balcony of my apartment in DC, watching the fireworks light up the sky, I felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, I knew I was in control of it. I had learned that success wasn't about fitting into someone else's idea of who I should be. It was about embracing who I was and owning my story. I had learned that success wasn't about fitting into someone else's idea of who I should be. It was about embracing who I was and owning my story.